Today, this morning, I'm going to talk about the 6 transcendent practices of the Bodhisattva, which are otherwise known as paramitas, or perfections. But I don't care for perfections so much. Words matter, they do. And we can get caught by words. But I like this transcendent practices, and the reason I was inspired to give this talk today is because of something I read in this book by Reb Anderson, Tenshin Reb Anderson, The Third Turning of the Wheel, Wisdom of the Samdhinirmochana Sutra. And this book is not an easy book. This book, we needed all 7 people in our study group that meets every week to try to make sense of most of it. But the part about the paramitas is pretty clear, and I'd like to read you some of it, even though I don't like to read too much during talks, but I didn't want you not to hear this. So it's in this section called the Heroic Bodhisattva. And he says, I want to live the Bodhisattva ideal. I want to be a person who practices these 6 perfections in the stillness of being authentically myself. And the teaching tells me that right along with this ideal, right next to this great virtue, is non-virtue, is lack of interest in virtue. They coexist. We have the aspiration to be this wonderful bodhisattva, along with being an imperfect human. The teaching and the aspiration here are given for the imperfect. We are imperfect people aspiring to complete, perfect, unsurpassed awakening for the welfare of all beings. We already know about imperfect people wishing to have supreme enlightenment for themselves, but how about imperfect people wishing for enlightenment for the welfare of others? It can happen that an imperfect person sincerely wishes to live this way. And if that person has some self-serving gaining idea, so be it. That's part of the imperfection. We can still aspire to the perfection of no gaining simultaneously with having a gaining idea. Yay! I thought that was really good news. If you haven't seen anybody who's perfect, maybe that's okay. Maybe all you can see is people who are imperfect aspiring to perfection. Part of fruitfully aspiring to perfection is to be willing to be imperfect, to be really good, to be really genuine that being imperfect is the Bodhisattva way. By that I mean that being generous towards your imperfection, being ethical towards your imperfection, being patient with your imperfection, being enthusiastic about being generous, ethical, and patient with your imperfection, being calm with your imperfection, and being wise about your imperfection is the Bodhisattva path of practice. This whole practice leads to understanding that imperfection does not have an own being, and neither does perfection. And such an understanding relieves all suffering and distress. You're not necessarily interested in being the perfect one, and you're not particularly interested in being the imperfect one. You'll be the imperfect one if that helps people. And if it helps people to be the perfect one, you'll be that way for a little while too. I thought that was very helpful. I remember sitting here in the early days with Kadagiri and hearing him talk about bodhisattvas and being very impressive himself and just thinking, oh my God, I will never be able to do that. How will I ever? I just felt like it was beyond me.
We can't hear you over here when you're facing that way. Would you repeat the last sentence?
Oh, I said I remember very clearly thinking that I would never be able to do this great Bodhisattva practice he was talking about. Never, ever. I just kind of trembled with it, you know. I was young, but hey, I just was overwhelmed by this idea of Bodhisattva practice. So, even today, this is very helpful to hear about how we are imperfectly practicing as Bodhisattvas. So my talk is about these 6 paramitas. And the Buddha said that there are 6 precepts or Bodhisattva practices that all the others are contained within 6 paramitas. So there are 6 kinds of practices that go beyond themselves, that don't attach even to themselves. Therefore, they're called 6 transcendent practices. At the most basic level, the Bodhisattva transcends the extremes of grasping at or ignoring these practices. The middle way of Bodhisattvas practicing them is by being mindful of them and embodying them. So even if you think you've never had the opportunity to be around a true Bodhisattva, you can observe people, likely members of this Sangha itself, who practice and embody these qualities. I'm thinking of Ben giving a workshop on anti-racism. I'm thinking of the people who work in the garden, putting out joyful effort, and even stumbling on Ted, joyfully sweeping. Ted loves to sweep and weed, so it's definitely joyful effort. So the paramitas are a path to enlightenment, the fruit of the Bodhisattva way, and most importantly, a means for benefiting beings. Again, they're transcendent because subject, object, and the practice of them are all free of self. The heroic Bodhisattva ideal is fundamental to Mahayana Buddhism. We chant these vows here every Sunday after the Dharma talk. Do you mindlessly chant the vows, or do you let them sink in, the meaning of those words? I have to admit, I have mindlessly chanted them myself. Do you dismiss them as merely a fantasy of grandiose proportions, or do you take in their meaning and import deeply? How does a vow differ from a statement? We chant these vows throughout our life of practice. The ideal of the solitary arhat who wins freedom for herself is not our way in Mahayana Buddhism. The life's work of a bodhisattva, of you and me, is that of relieving suffering, our own and that of beings that we encounter. The bodhisattva's life work is the same as the historical Buddha. Shakyamuni's entire focus for teaching was to end suffering. He wasn't a mystic or a yogi or a philosopher. He was awake to the human condition and the fact and the cause of suffering and the key to ending it. So Zen Buddhism is unique in that the first thing we learn to do when we cross the threshold is to sit down on a cushion and be with our body, breath, and our minds. Tibetan Buddhist masters find that to be curious. In their tradition, preliminary practices are done before meditation commences. The practice of generosity and of ethical conduct come first. When I first came to MZMC, it was all about Zazen, first and last. I didn't hear about ethical conduct until we were offered the opportunity to receive the precepts, Soa Rakusu, and undergo the ceremony to become a Buddha, to enter the Buddha way. Formally. Before that, I just saw the Bodhisattva's qualities demonstrated by Dainin Katagiri and Tumoi Katagiri, embodied in their everyday actions. So some might argue, and I tend to agree with them, that not emphasizing precepts or ethics enough in our sanghas from the beginning led to the scandals and the unethical behavior of teachers, including in this community. Since then, we've learned a lot about the importance of precepts and ethical conduct as part of the threefold nature of our practice: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So back to the first paramita, dana. So what does generosity look like as a transcendent practice? Well, it's the emptiness of the three wheels: giver, receiver, and gift. There is no self doing the giving, no self receiving, and nothing being given or received. The purest form of this for me happens in sesshin. There's nothing personal in the servers offering food formally to each person in the zendo, yet there's a ceremony involved in that giving, receiving, and offering. In the meal chant, we acknowledge that the food we've been given is to sustain our lives, as medicine to allow us to continue our practice in good health. Nothing personal, completely universal. A gift given with the intention of passing it on to benefit all beings. The experience of this interconnection is what makes some of us realize that the practice of Boryoki meals is elegant, even beautiful, after mastering some of the details. Then one can notice that. It's a little hard when you're going, oh no, oh. In his book on the Paramitas, Norma Fisher gives us some examples for practicing generosity creatively. Number 1, share your happiness. This is so subtle, but so important. Being around happy people rubs off on us. We naturally feel better in their presence. So it's important to cultivate joy in ourselves. 2, give teaching, share books, websites, or sayings that you feel are worthwhile. 3, do something every day for your own health and well-being. 4, give flowers on a distant hillside, things that don't belong to you. Well, be careful with that one. A blade of grass or a speck of dust. I love that one. It's so whimsical. I'm gonna transfer the merit of this flower that doesn't belong to me. So moving on then, what's the transcendent nature of shila, or ethical conduct? We might say emptiness, because insight into emptiness makes us flexible, open, soft, and forgiving when we practice ethical conduct. We know we can never condemn anyone, ourselves, or anyone else. Everyone's doing the best they can, including us. And sometimes we're the hardest on ourselves. Oftentimes, we're the hardest on ourselves. Sometimes restraint is necessary, self-restraint or restraining another, but it's done as an act of kindness, not of punishment. I wish that the prison industrial complex would think of it that way. In the practice of ethical conduct, there's no intolerance or arrogance, no sense of ethical purity or impurity. There's just love, forgiveness, and appreciation. In his book, written in the 13th century and translated by Ken MacLeod, the great Lama Tokme Zongpo offers 37 verses to describe the Bodhisattva path. 6 of the verses cover the paramitas, and here's Zongpo's verse about the second paramita, ethical conduct, from his book. If you cannot look after yourself because you have no ethical discipline, then your intention to take care of others is simply a joke. Observe ethical behavior without concern for a conventional life. This is the practice of a bodhisattva. According to Zangpo, the practice of ethical conduct is simply taking care of oneself. It's self-care. That seems kind of paradoxical, doesn't it? The commitment to benefit others starts with ourselves, and as a person of Tibet, Zangpo knows that pretty well. His second point's important too. Most people practice ethics and morality as a conventional thing to do because they care about what people think of them. But Zangpo says bodhisattvas aren't concerned with how they look to others. They don't even notice. And that makes me think of Ryokan, the Japanese poet monk who was the eldest of his family and should have taken over the responsibility for the family business, but instead he became an unsui, plows in water. He became a wandering monk who played with children and hid toys in his robes. And he's revered in Japan now, Ryokan. He's like a hero in Japan. But I'm sure at the time, he wasn't a hero. He was probably looked down on by his family. So precepts and paramitas are the practices of morality and ethics. They're the bodhisattva's practice without attachment, with generosity. So all these they contain each other. They're practiced using each other. And even though we go through them 1, 2, 3, third paramita, fourth paramita, they are really not, they don't exist in that way. They just they arise together. Having said that, we'll go on to the third paramita, often called forbearance. Kshanti is so important to the long view of life and practice. Patience. No matter what, we'll encounter situations that bring up anger for us or impatience. And when that happens, we have Kshanti to draw on. Often posited as the antidote to afflictive states, Kshanti paramita seems especially connected to anger or ill will. So oftentimes the paramitas are seen as antidotes to the afflictive states. And I can't give you exactly for all of them what the afflictive state is, but I don't think that's super important. So as bodhisattvas, anger will still arise, but we won't act on it. We won't create further karma from it. We simply note its arrival, we sit with it and apply the practice of patience. Easier said than done. But sitting meditation and the application over time of patience to afflictive states does bear fruit, even becomes probable. What about you? Do you see a difference from your practice in your relationship to your anger? I used to be a very angry person. And, even when I thought that I had dealt with all my anger and I wasn't an angry person anymore, my good, dear Dharma sisters brought it up to me and pointed it out, which was very helpful, actually. Didn't feel good at the time, but it was very helpful to me in doing this practice. I've known some pretty angry Zen teachers, actually, who have, experienced some losses due to their unskillful expression of their anger. And that has helped them to learn and to soften over time. Remembering to be a benefit to others helps with inevitable setbacks. A bodhisattva who remembers this in the midst of anger will be practicing patience as a transcendent, skillful means. Because that's the key. It's very hard in the midst of anger or other strong negative emotions to remember that we're actually practicing to be a benefit to others. But it's like a little life raft thrown out to us to remember it. Tokmei Zongpo's verse for this paramita is, for bodhisattvas who want to be rich in virtue, a person who hurts you is a precious treasure. Cultivate patience for everyone without irritation or resentment. This is the practice of a bodhisattva. This attitude toward hurtful people is embedded in the Tibetan culture. Hurtful people are precious because they're rare, actually. More or less, nice people are more common. Most people are fairly nice. They don't challenge you too much. They don't push your buttons. The Zen Center is full of very nice people. But a really rude and disturbing person is rare. Such people will consistently do for you what most people won't. They'll stir up your anger and other difficult emotions, and that forces you to actively practice what you've learned. That's a very Tibetan idea. But Pema Chodron often talks about that in her books and her teachings. So Zongpo instructs us to cultivate patience, not to be patient. There's a slight difference there. Cultivation, as in cultivating a field, is a good metaphor for the practice of patience. It's a gentle, steady effort we keep up quietly day after day, year after year. When triggered by a difficult person, we can remain calm, and we can even ask ourselves, in this moment of anger, who are you? Who is this other? What's really going on? As in a koan, the value is in the questioning. We aren't looking for the answers. There is really no you, no me, no emotions, no words. There's simply experience that flares up and out. And knowing that all of our conceptions at any given moment are just that, conceptions, helps us cultivate patience perfectly. No, I maybe shouldn't have titled my talk The 6 Transcendent Practices, because I'm only going to get to 4 this morning. That's a big topic. So the last one I'll talk about is joyful effort. Sometimes this one is called energy or diligence, but I like joyful effort because the only way we're going to be able to continue with this practice endlessly is through joyful effort. Joy makes for a lighter load going forward and to no sense of a load at all. So virya is another word for energy or effort, and it's translated as energy or even zest. It implies irrepressibility. Bodhisattvas are like the pop-up Bodhidharma dolls in Japan. You whack them and they fall over, but they pop back up immediately. Have you ever played with them? I have played with them. We can see the pop back up as the central characteristic of bodhisattvas. Like Energizer bunnies, they pop back up from adversity. They get back up even when knocked down over and over. Bodhisattva's impossible to defeat energy comes from their practice of joyful effort. Unlike mythical heroes that conquer monsters and overcome obstacles by force, bodhisattvas conquer internal foes, their own selfishness and smallness, using patience. Once they do this, they go forth again with joyful effort. It's love and not power that motivates and propels them forward. But sometimes we get discouraged, even depressed. Yes, bodhisattvas can be depressed and discouraged. In these circumstances, we need to practice patience, forgive ourselves for having these difficult states of mind, or wait them out. Only then can we remember joyful effort. So I had a major depressive episode several years ago, and I think the hardest part of it for me ended up being forgiving myself for having that experience. I felt a lot of shame around it, and I had to work with that. And eventually I got through that. But it was difficult. It's difficult to forgive ourselves, especially Zen teacher. Should not be depressed, should not be discouraged. That's the attitude I put on myself. So I have personal experience around that. To be able to continue to practice joyful effort, though, on behalf of others, and we can forgive ourselves too on behalf of others. Now, that would make it easier, right, if we were doing it for others? So we can rely on the faith built up by our practice energy first, and then it's important to put some energy into taking good care of ourselves through good food, exercise, breathing, talking through our feelings. Joyful effort is almost no effort at all. It's effortless effort, effort without strain or pressure, just doing something for the doing, not for the payment or the prestige of it. Bodhisattvas have impossible goals. They want full happiness for all beings everywhere. That's like impossible. That's their goal. They realize it's impossible. Therefore, it'll take them a very long time. Their goal is so huge that it might as well be no goal at all. With a goal this big, bodhisattvas will be making joyful effort forever, without expectation or life after life. Heidegger used to say, oh, life after life. Sometimes they get tired and take rests. Sometimes they see their effort isn't working, so they stop. Taking rests or changing course is part of the practice of joyful effort, not a break from it. So, turns out there's no breaks for bodhisattvas, but there's rest periods. So they have to take these relaxing breaks for their own sake and to revitalize so they can go on making joyful effort on behalf of others. And as I said earlier about the other perfections, there is no such thing as joyful effort. In the end, we can't reify it because it's only imaginary. Knowing that helps us to practice it most effectively, and that's true of all the paramitas. Things, practices, teachings are not fundamentally real, though we project them to be. In Mahayana teaching, everything is understood as projection. Things don't exist the way we think that they do. They're fluid and free instead. The 6 paramitas are projections too. They're skillful means, ways of looking at and approaching what is ineffable, ungraspable, and impossible. Being truly alive. So what is truly real? We can't say, Buddhism doesn't say. It says practice, live, make your best effort. Don't try to figure it out. Release into a larger, more loving space and see what happens. Listen to the teachings and then let them go. Just sit, study, let go, repeat. Same message as the Heart Sutra, where we negate all the Buddha's early teachings, know this, know that, know this, know that. And then at the end we extol prajna. Yeah. Similar to that. So if we, if a person gives a good Dharma talk, then you shouldn't really be able to tell anyone afterward what it was about. Katagiri used to give great Dharma talks. I remember, listening and then just walking out feeling stunned outside by the lake, and someone asking me, well, how was the talk? Great. Well, what was it about? I don't know. So I don't think this has been one of those talks, but it's been lovely to see you today and share what I'm interested in with you. So thank you very much. And I guess we can have some discussion or some question right now from those of you in the room and people on Zoom. I see there's a nice group of you on Zoom today. Hi, Deb.
One of our recent practice periods was on, the focus was the 6 paramitas, and yeah, and for each week we would have like an assignment for one of them, and for generosity we had to give something material-wise every day. Every day to someone, and it had to be like a gift mostly. And which was kind of funny because it seemed like a daunting task at first. How are you going to come up with that? But the opportunities were everywhere, actually. It was a pretty easy thing to find once when you were looking for it. So it was kind of a neat experience. And it took some vulnerability to do it too. Some people were a little surprised, or like, what are you doing?
What are you doing there?
But it seemed like a pleasant experience for everyone involved. It was, do those awkward feelings, but it was just an interesting experience.
Yeah, sounds like it. I was thinking when you first brought it up, wow, that sounds hard, but then it becomes easier, right, as you do it. Yeah, you have to not overthink it. You start thinking it, then you go down the wrong path.
I have a question, Susan. It's Meredith.
Hi, Meredith.
Hi. I'm wondering how your relationship with the paramitas has kind of like evolved over time, like how you think about it. You talked a little bit about that, but I'm curious to know more.
Well, my relationship with them has changed. I'd like to say it's been refined, or that I keep refining it. But I think, consistent with one of the points of my talk is that I see them as skillful means more now, and I see their emptiness more, their sort of effervescent nature. Whereas I think before I saw them as guidelines, these are guidelines, these are practices, you got to do these, And now I think of them as something I remember. So much of what we do in practice is to remember what we've taught, remember where we're at, what we're doing. So I'd like to say it's changed that I hold them more lightly. I take them more seriously, but I hold them more lightly. So. Anybody else here today in the room? Hi.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Really
Nice
a
to see you.
helpful talk. I just was struck by how you articulated the transcendent meaning no self. And it just hit me today, and I thought it really, like, I'm angry, self. Maybe I can't imagine being patient, but if I think of no self and patience, I don't know, it just helps me make it seem like a more doable skillful means to get from to practice. And the generosity, I think, the no self and the Dharma is not trying to be a generous person. It's different from that.
Yeah.
I think just what you answered, how you answered Meredith's question too, about how it's changed for you over time.
Well, I think there's freedom there, right? I mean, there's freedom in noticing that piece about no self, you know. If there's no self, then maybe there's some breathing room here. I don't have to feel stuck. Nirvana is the absence of suffering. It isn't like some big, you know, fireworks going off in the sky over here over the lake. It's just simply being, resting in non-suffering. I think that's the point. Thank you. Hi.
Hey, after saying joyful effort doesn't exist, can you give an example of it?
Of it not existing or of joyful effort?
Yeah, joyful effort.
Well, I think I put some joyful effort into this sitting up here today. You know, sometimes I feel nervous before I give a talk, and so today what I did is use my imagination to put myself in the place of the post-talk experience, that of relaxation and no stress, no nervousness, and that kind of helped. That, and I had a song in my head during Zazen. I love doing Zazen with everyone. You know, on Sundays it's very intimate because during the week we sit and face a wall and we're further away from each other, and the Sundays were close. So I had this song, Imagine, by John Lennon, going through my head during the Dharma, during the sitting, and I connected that to imagination and to the Bodhisattva path, which Norm Fisher says is a path of imagination. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Very much so.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for that lovely talk.
You're welcome.
I'd like to revisit that passage that you read from initially, but you repeat the title of the book and possibly the page.
Yeah, so where did I put it? Oh, it's right here. It's the third turning of the wheel. And that section on page 173 and 174. You're welcome. Maybe you can take it out of the library, because if you buy it, you might regret it. Right, Bonnie? Bonnie's in my Dharma study group, and she has her own opinions about this book, which you can imagine. That was my idea, you know. I thought, let's get into something meaty, let's, you know. And then halfway through, I'm like, oh boy, this is great. Sorry, Reb, it's a very good book.
Just sort of the last couple of weeks, I've had a number of just kind of icky things happening that have made me angry. And I keep telling myself, like, don't be angry, let it go, let it go. And all of that has kind of stretched me, and then I sort of had a little bit of a crash. This all stuff. So maybe it's not about not being angry, it's just like walking with the anger. And one way I've kind of found myself like forgiving is like remembering old times when I sort of set or done certain things like that myself, and trying to hold like a sphere of compassion around those people, this circumstance myself. And it's really hard and frustrating, but like I feel like you just have to go at it and try and make sense of it, even though it's like bigger than your comprehension.
Yeah, and I think what you said was key, is putting it into a container of compassion. If you can see it that way, that's a wonderful thing to do. We can always make our point of view broader. We can always put it within a larger container. We can always remember what our vow is, what our intention is. But I think that, just telling ourselves, don't be angry, it's like saying, be patient, damn it. It doesn't really work to go about it that way. And it can just tie us up in further knots when it doesn't work. But you're right. I mean, those situations are like the difficult person. They're the difficult situation that we can't escape. It's like a snake in a bamboo tube, Heidegger used to say. When you're backed into that corner and you can't go anywhere, that's a great opportunity for practice. And practice can give you that perspective. You might still not like it. You don't have to like it, but it is the greatest opportunity when we feel cornered by our inner states or by a situation outside ourselves. Although nothing is ever completely outside ourselves, we're always part of it. So, you're welcome.
Sue, it's Mark Gemmel. How you doing?
Hi, Mark. Good to see you.
I was just reminded, I really love your talk today. I'm usually so disappointed, but today it was really good. So I want to thank you. I've always sensed the seething rage underneath everything you say, but today. So no, but I was just thinking of anger with that last comment. I listened to that Thich Nhat Hanh book on tape called The Art of Mindful Living.
Oh,
It's been out there for 30 years. And I can still hear him say, he says, anger, I see you, I bow to you, like that. And just that exercise allows me to process it differently in my body. So he's not fighting with it, he's not denying it, I see you, I bow to you. And then he takes it a step further. He says, anger, I take you in my arms like a mother takes her baby, I will take care of you. And I tell people this all the time, just as a basic mindfulness exercise, but anger would be the primary thing I think we wrestle with. So being able to deal with that more as it comes up, and that becomes more of a habit and a practice, that's actually effective. I ask my wife occasionally, I say, am I a nicer person than I used to be? She says, yes. So she's probably lying, but if she's not, it's because I practice this.
That's great.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's not far-fetched to me to say anger, I bow to you, because anger is a hugely powerful force, So yeah, before you can get to the point of cradling it in your arms, just bow to it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that we're probably done now, and I'd like to turn it over now to John, are you doing the announcements?
Yes.